course, I have to sneeze. So what I thought I would do today is, with the 5 new charts that we're using today, we would first go back over what we've already looked at. So we'll go back over like the first, remember there's 16 different things to look at in this one consideration. I'm going to pull up the sheet in a second, but so we'll go back to that stuff. And then where we ended was reception. And I thought what I would do is then I would do a whole big thing on reception today, and then see how close we can get to finishing. Because as you'll see, all of the sections of this one consideration are actually quite in depth. So let me open up the consideration again. Okay, so this is really important. The fourth is the causes of things. The causes of things helping matters so they come to be. Now, remember that initially what we were thinking about, or what I was talking about, is that this is really talking about a horary or an electional standpoint. So for instance, if you're creating an election, then you really want to see how things come to be in the chart, right? If you're asking a question about whether I'm pregnant or not, you're really concerned with how things come to be, how the pregnancy comes to be. And so this is what he's saying. This is the cause of things helping matters so they come to be and are perfected, right? If I'm interested in, can I get pregnant, or am I pregnant, then I'm interested in that matter being perfected. And so this is why this is the first real astrological delineational astrological consideration, the fourth consideration, because this is how things work or don't work, right? So the first of the fourth consideration is the arrival or advancement, and then the second of them is the deterioration or worsening, right? So that's, once again, so this basically becomes a way to enter the chart. This becomes a possible, like there are many different ways, but this becomes a possible way to enter the chart. So let's just look at these 3 things once again. We're looking at how things come to be, right? The causes of things helping matters so that they come to be. The causes are these particular astrological things, right? Or astrological configurations or setups, and are perfected, and those which prohibit matters so they do not come to be. So that's the very first consideration. How do we notice, how do we figure out how things are going to actually happen, or if things aren't going to happen at all? Okay, so the first one is we look to see what is advancing. So the arrival or advancement of things, and that's basically if a planet is in an angle 1, 4, 7, or 10, or a succeeding house 2, 5, 8, 11. Okay, so that's pure arrival or advancement. So it implies something, or from the words seem to imply more, but really it's about, is it in an advantageous place where its particular issues can be advanced, right? So if a planet is in an angle, then the planetary significations, and then also the things that it represents by house rulership, are able to advance. And we'll look at this in a second. The second one is deterioration or worsening. And this is basically when a planet is in a cadent house, 3, 6, 9, 12. Right? So initially, the very first thing we're looking at is there advancement? This al-Iqbal, is there advancement? Or is there deterioration? Is there al-Idbar? Or rather, what is advancing? What is deteriorating? Okay, or what is falling away? I think withdrawal, retreat, that's another term. And if you remember from the last class that we did, we talked about cadent houses as far as retreat, what retreat meant, and how cadent houses, how planets in cadent houses retreat away from angles, right? Retreat is if a planet were in the third domicile, which is called remote. Third domicile is the third domicile from the ascendant from each angle. So which would make it then 3, 6, 9, 12. Okay, those are the first two things we looked at. We've already looked at these things. We're just kind of going back over. Then we looked at conjunction, and what we found, conjunction or turning back or connection, what we found that this basically means any aspect, including the bodily conjunction, right? But it specifically meant what? Any applying aspect. And I know that that's where, I know Anne Louise, that was something we talked about, and Maria, that may still be something that we're interested in kind of figuring out and defining. But so remember, so what we've got advancement, we've got retreat, we've got connection. These are 3 of the 16 ways in which things can be advanced or diminished or ruined or not come to be. So 3 different ways in which things can either come to be or not come to be. So connection. So obviously the type of connection and the type of applying thing is important. And then the next one, the 4th, is separation or disjoining. So we talked about, so we looked at those, and we looked at the last 5 charts in that in this particular separation and disjoining is basically a separating aspect. And so I kind of want to interject a little thing here, because one of the things I notice on Reddit all the time is that people are really, really connected or invested in whether or not they have some kind of advanced configuration like a T-square or a stellium or a yod. And everybody really wants those. People are really invested in having those and looking for them, and being able to recognize them and knowing what they are. And so, and they've kind of taken over as this overarching narrative of personality. What I think is basically I'm seeing through looking at this material is that a lot of the narrative that we're looking for in the chart actually comes from these considerations. Like, for instance, when we look at something where a planet is translation, remember we talked about translation last week, something is translated where a third thing is bringing another thing to another thing. That's a narrative of sorts. That translation creates a narrative. Prohibition, we're going to come to these terms in a second, creates a narrative. Advancement creates a narrative of sorts. And so this is a way to be kind of understanding the story. I remember I was a guest at this astrology club, and one of the women said, I really want to know how to understand the poetry in the chart. And I thought, oh my God. But you know what? This is kind of the way to do that, to be really honest. This is kind of the way to, in my opinion, or rather, this is something to explore, something I'm at the moment exploring. So I wanted to slip that in because we're about to move into these other definitions that get more into who's doing who and who is doing what to who. So 4th is separation or disjoining, which of course is just a separating aspect. That follows conjunction or connection, which is an applying aspect. So if all we did was look for those 4 things, which we're going to do, as a matter of fact, let's stop there and just look for those 4 things and then come back to the others. Okay, so that's kind of why I'm saying this becomes a way for us to enter the chart. So just looking for those 4 things. What's advancing, meaning what's either in angles or succeeding houses. What's retreating, which means it's in a cadent house. What's connecting, which means it's an applying aspect. What's separating, which means it's a separating aspect. Or what do they call it? No, not deterioration. I forget what the term you use. What is that term? What is, yeah, disregard or separating. Disregard. What's in disregard? All right. So, where are you? Come back, come back, come back. There. Okay, I hope you can see the chart. Oh, put into the chat. If you cannot see the chart, put it into the chat for me, please, and I'll stop the screen share. Okay, so Venus is was about 6 degrees away. Neptune is right here on the ascendant. We would say the Neptune. Let's put the Neptune in there since he's right on the ascendant, and I'm realizing I don't want to disregard the outward planets when they are when they are right on cusps, right on cusps, especially cusps of angles. Okay, so the Neptune, and I'm going to even put the Venus, even though she's 6 degrees away. Definitely the Mars, definitely the Mercury and the Sun. So Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Neptune. I would not say the Moon and the Jupiter. Okay, so just looking for what's advancing. Mars is advancing, Mercury is advancing, Neptune is advancing, without question. Venus is kind of on the cusp. She's beginning to advance, but definitely Mars, Mercury, Neptune. So Mars is the ruler of the 11th and the ruler of the 4th. So those issues can advance. So his issues. So what's he represent? That's how we would look at it. Oh, here's another. Oh, Mariah's here. Great. Hey, Mariah, we just started, so welcome. And I'm going to come back and I'll kind of go back over everything that we just looked at. This is the very first chart, and we just kind of got into it. I don't know if you saw any of last week's video, but we're basically kind of going through at our own pace of this material, which means we're going back over some of it. So what we're looking at right now is we're just trying to find what planets are angular or succedent, right? So angular means 1, 4, 7, 10. Succedent means 2, 5, 8, and 11, right? So we were just deciding that obviously the Neptune is, Venus is close to it, but not quite. The Mars definitely is, the Mercury is. And then we want to find out, and that's called advancement. So what planets are advancing? So this is basically, what is the first thing that we look at that is a cause of things to either come to be or not come to be? Then we want to look at planets that are retreating. So planets that, I think even called it dissolving or dissolution or something like that, but planets that are in retreat. So we've got the planets that are advancing. So for instance, I was just talking about how this Mars, his significations can advance, and especially why? Because he's in his own sign. And then also his house significations can advance because he's in an angle. Angles advance all of the significations via inherent significations and via house significations through house rulerships. Mars rules the 4th and the 11th. So both of those things would also probably be things that would be interesting. So now that so here's something to think about. When we have planets that are in advanced positions or in positions of advancement, then we could probably say that aspects that involve those planets might show up more in the life than others. Or we looked at last week where we had a person who asked about their physical deformities, and we saw that the planet that ruled the ascendant, which is the body, was in a cadent position. Well, so it was retreating, and the planets that were trining it was in a grand trine with the ruler of the 6th, which is infirmity, and the moon, which was in the sign of the ruler of the 6th, both trining it, and those things gave infirmities in all of the places that were represented by the signs. So I'll bring that up again because I know that sounded like a kind of convoluted explanation, but we saw that last week with that grand trine and how easy it made the infirmities happen to the body, and the fact that the planets that represented the infirmity were in advanced positions, and the planet that represented the body was in a retreating position, and it was weak. It was in its fall. All right, so we'll see if I can find that chart, and I'll bring it up in a second because that was such a good example of this. Okay, so we figured out. Okay, so who is retreating? Saturn, maybe the Venus, the moon, and Jupiter. So Saturn, who's retreating? So that's what's retreating. So let's just do that with everybody for a second, and then we'll come. No, let's do all four with everybody. Now, so then the next one we were talking about, Mariah, was who is in connection, which means an applying aspect. And you remember, applying means a faster planet is in a lower degree than a slower planet. And the faster planet is going towards that same degree as the slower planet. We'll talk about that again in a second. We'll see if we can find that. And then whether or not there is disregard or separation. So those are the first four things we look at in every chart: advancement, retreat, connection, and disregard. So let's find them. We already figured out that Mars is advancing and Mercury is advancing. Mercury is faster than Mars. Sun is faster than Mars, but Sun is not aspecting Mars. Mercury is not aspecting Mars. Venus is faster than Mars. Venus is at 3 degrees of Capricorn. Mars is at 4 degrees of Scorpio. Venus is in connection to Mars. So Venus is in an applying aspect to Mars. Not only that, this is going to be an example of reception. This is going to be one of our examples of reception that we're going to talk about when we come down the line. I'm glad that we have this particular chart. Okay, so why did I say it's an applying aspect? Because Venus is faster than Mars. Venus is in a lower degree of the sign than Mars. And also because the signs that can aspect Scorpio are, what is it? 3, 4, 5 away. So that's 3 is Capricorn, 4 is Aquarius, 5 is Pisces, and 11, 10, 9. And of course that goes Virgo, 11, Leo, 10, and 9, Cancer. And then of course the opposite sign. All right, the opposite and the same. So that's how we know who can do what to whom. Venus is doing that to Mars. So that says this Venus-Mars sextile is probably important. What other things do we have going on? We're always looking to see what's going on with the moon. As a matter of fact, the next thing we look at is going to be the moon. What is she got going on? The very next thing it looks like she's about to do is she's going to go to this Jupiter. And she's right within mighty to do that. So yeah, so we can say this is a connection. Moon Jupiter is a connection. Venus Mars is a connection. But and then last but not least, it would be if it weren't retrograde. Jupiter is retrograde at 20. Saturn is going direct at 21. So there could be, if Jupiter were not retrograde, there would be a connection, but they are separating because Jupiter is leaving, right? Jupiter is not going to go up the scale towards Saturn. He's going down the scale towards 19 degrees, 18 degrees, 17 degrees. Okay, so that's how we look at those things. So this is called refrenation, where it should be going towards it, but then it goes retrograde. And so what would possibly happen doesn't. So once again, narrative. What are the two areas in life? This is the person themselves, Saturn, and then this is the ruler of the 12th, which is the self-undoing. So there's some kind of aspect with the self-undoing where they may have a yes, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. Where pessimism reigns, optimism, they get optimistic, but pessimism reigns. I don't know. I'm just but this is how we look at this refrenation. What is the ruler of the 12th house refraining the ruler of the first from doing? That's the narrative we're looking at. Let's look at another chart. That's how we're going. So that's what we're kind of getting at, is how we can go. I'm going to go a little faster. I just wanted to be sure and bring her up to speed so that we knew exactly what's going on. All right. Okay, that was Bulbakill. This is Holistic Star 61. And okay, we're just looking at those first four, right? So we can just do them kind of quickly. So we know the moon this is a succeeding house. And then we know all of these planets are, for the most part. So Jupiter, Sun, Neptune, maybe not these two. I wouldn't say these two because they're so close. Maybe not even the Neptune. All of those are so close. Look at how close they are to that cusp. And certainly not the Mercury and the Venus, right? But I would say definitely the Jupiter and the Sun, and then also the Moon, and then definitely the Saturn. Those are advancing. Then I would say this Neptune, Mars, Uranus, Mercury, Venus, those are all retreating. Where, okay, so, and we know why, right? Because we're looking at either angles or succeeding houses. We've only got one angular planet. I mean, we got the Pluto angular, mind you, but one angular classical planet, and that's the Saturn. That's important. And it's in the house, the fourth house. And we know that Saturn represents things under the ground and agriculture and things of that nature. This person might be interested in hydroponic gardening, right? Because it's water. Anyway, but that's how we do it. That's how, I don't know, I might be right, I might be wrong. You know what I'm saying? But I'm still coming up with whatever, because I know what all the significant, not all, but I know what the significations generally mean. And that's how we do it. Why is this one the one that's angular? That's the question, right? And of course, if we were looking whole sign, these two planets would be angular. Anyway, I don't want to go too off base. Okay, what's applying and what is not? So fastest planet is the moon. Is she applying to anybody? She will at some point apply to Mars, but she's not quite there yet. She's separating, right, from sun. So there's a separation. There's a disregard between the sun and the moon. Okay, so we know that. What about the sun and Jupiter? Sun is faster than Jupiter. He's way disregarding. What about Sun and Mars? Sun and Mars are way far, kind of away from each other. So there could be. What about the Mercury and all of these other things? Oh, well, I mean, oh, wait. Bam, we found it. Sun, Saturn. And this is another one of those very nice, one of those very good receptions that we'll talk about. We found one. Sun, Saturn. And we found another one, Moon, Saturn, right? Because the moon's, and as a matter of fact, we're gonna find what's the next one, which is translation. And that's when one planet is going to bring the light of so planet C is gonna bring the light of planet A to planet B. And that's what the moon is gonna do. Before the sun can get to the Saturn, the moon will transfer the light of the sun to Saturn. That's transfer of light. That's the next one that we were just going to look at. Okay. And so here, and then the one after that, which is called collection, we've got that too. Because when the sun, or really when the moon gets to the opposition of Uranus, or really rather even this classical planet Mars, which is even better. When the moon finally gets to the opposition of Mars, Mars will collect the light of all of these planets and this planet, right? Because the moon will have gone first to Jupiter, then to Sun, then to Saturn, bam, and then to Neptune if you want to include him, and then bam to Mars. Mars will collect. So those are the next two categories. So we started with advancement, which we said the moon and all of this stuff. Well, no, just these two were advancing, right? And that there's a disregard within this advance. Right? The moon is disregarding the sun as it's advancing, as these two are advancing, but both the sun and the moon are applying or in connection to Saturn, to this Saturn. And remember, what did I say? The Saturn is the only planet that's angular in this chart, right? So already we've got a theme that's showing itself. I haven't decided to go into it just yet, but we've got a theme that's showing itself. We found the disregard, right? Because the faster planet, the moon, is at 15, than the slower planet, the sun, which is at 14. That's the disregard or separation. Then we've got an application or conjunction or connection between this. And remember, conjunction can be any kind of aspect, not just the bodily conjunction. So the moon is, as long as it's applying. So the moon is applying to the Saturn. The sun is applying to the Saturn. And that's it. Okay, so those are the applications. Those are the main applications and separations, right? And advancements and retreats and translation and a possible collection or a potential collection at the very end, if we were to move this chart through. So this has all of the 6 things. We didn't even get to the other 2 yet, but we are going to. Well, that's Wickhead. I didn't need to go there. Can you see this chart, the Wickhead chart? You should be able to see it now. Okay, Wickhead. Okay, what's advancing? Saturn, Mercury, this stuff is advancing. Jupiter, that stuff, Jupiter's advancing, Saturn's advancing, Mercury's advancing. Technically, Mars is advancing here. Okay, what is not? Venus is not. The sun is, well, sun's in 7 degrees. I'll give it to him. His rays are far. The moon, not quite, right? So I'll say all that stuff's not really advancing. But the stuff that is, once again, the most unequivocal, there are 2 really unequivocally angular planets in this chart. One is Saturn and the other is Jupiter. Okay, so those are absolutely advancing. So we know definitely the ruler of the 11th, the ruler of the 10th, the ruler of the 9th, the ruler of the 8th. 8th through 11, all of those houses somehow should be advancing in this person's life. Okay, so 8 through 11. And also we know that with the Saturn in the 7th, there could already be some issues with marriage or relationships. And so more than likely they're involving money. Look at how the Saturn, the Jupiter is in a Saturn sign, which is Aquarius, right? And Saturn's there. Saturn, the ruler, is there in the 7th. So, and Jupiter rules the 2nd, which is the person's money, the money of the other. So this person may have I knew there was one of these charts where I thought, yeah, is there a person with money that they've married someone who has money, but then there's been problems with the money or something like that, and looking at this instability with the money because the Uranus on the 8th there too. So yeah, okay, so that's what I'm talking about. That's how all of a sudden now I know what to look for. Remember, the questions are always about, what do we look for? Where do we start? What do we look for? Worse? Well, start with what's advancing. What's in a position of advancement in the chart? The Jupiter is, the Saturn is, unequivocally. The Mars is, the Mercury is. Okay, and then look, Mercury rules the ruler of this. Mercury rules the part of fortune in the 7th again, right? And that would be also the 7th from the part of fortune. So once again, there's some kind of connection with possible marriage or partnership and money and finances. All right, so that's how we're doing it. That's how we that's how, oh wait, did we look to see what the connections were? Let's. Fastest planet is the moon. That's how I'll always start from now on. Fastest planet is the moon. Look, it's just disregarded Jupiter. Moon's at 11, Jupiter's at 9. So it's just disregarded the square. Anything else? Nope, doesn't look like the moon. So the moon is, the moon is, yes, it's applying to the sun, right? So we will give it, but that means it's going into combustion. It's approaching the new moon. And so it's in combustion. And look at how shitty this is for the moon. It's going to be for the moon because she's going into combustion. And then once she comes out, she'll be besieged between the sun and Saturn. So between extreme heat and dryness and extreme cold and dryness. So this is a very perilous, there's some perilous emotional stuff going on. And unfortunately, the marriage will bring out all of that, right? Because it's all happening around the 7th house. So whatever this kind of significant other partnership is about will bring out, those will be kind of torturous. Look at it. So also, it's in Scorpio, which is the moon's fall, right? So she's in fall. She's in combustion. She's about to conjunct. Well, she's not about to, but at some point in the future, she will conjunct that Saturn. So this has got some rough stuff going, rough emotional stuff going on. It's some hard stuff. Some hard relationship stuff in this particular chart. Okay, so that's once again how we can know what's going on. So let's see, Venus. That's what we have. Venus squaring the Jupiter. Okay, so we've got that connection. Venus at 3, Jupiter at 9. Okay, so that's what to be looking for. Know that when we're looking for what's applying and what's separating, we're always keeping in mind what's slower, what's faster. The moon is the fastest. Mercury is the next, then Venus, then the sun, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn, then Uranus, then Neptune, then Pluto. Where is he? There he is. Right? So that's how we do it. That's how we know. Like I said, we also know what signs aspect each other, right? What signs look at each other. So it's always 3, 4, 5, 11, 10, 9, and then across, next to and across, right? Or the one the sign itself and the sign across. Those are always, so that's how we'll always do it. Okay. Who's next? We didn't look to see if there was any kind of fun stuff. Like we didn't get RLW 1900. Okay, RLW 1900, what's advancing? This stuff. That's it. Oh wait, these things, right? This stuff is in the ninth. Pluto. Pluto is advancing in the seventh house, right? We were just looking at it, right? The fifth house. And look, it's Leo. And look, the sun's in Leo. And look, the moon is in Virgo. What do we know about those signs? What do we know about those signs? Leo, Virgo, Gemini. What do we know about those signs? They're sterile signs. And we know that, what do we know? We know that all of this stuff is happening in the fifth house of children. And there's Leo on the fifth, the ruler of the fifth in a sterile sign, even though it's in its own sign. And then also the moon is in Virgo. And look at how she's just leaving the Mars. Remember, she's leaving the Mars. She's just left the Saturn, really, from her own detriment. Yeah, so this chart is going to maybe have issues having children. Now, I have each of these charts basically has given me some information about them. Hold on one sec. Let me see what it says, RLW, because what kind of chart it was. This chart was a child sex abuse chart. Okay, well, we were looking to see. Let's see if we can see any of that through what's advancing, right? So what's advancing? Well, we've got the Pluto advancing in the seventh. That would be different. That would be rough, right? And then we've got the ruler of the seventh and the fifth, Mars in Virgo, which is the fall of Venus. And look at how Venus is in fall, moon's in fall. So there's definitely something going on with my ability to express love and my ability to do to let go, release, have sex, be sexually uninhibited, and there may have been violence. There may be violence of some time towards it. So yeah, so so already we can see from the things that are advancing. Maybe what some of the things that I asked about. I should go back with that, but this also makes me wonder if that then affected their interest in having children or their ability to have children, or how was that affected, or was there a sense of barrenness that happened, or something like that as a result? Since this seems to be pointing, where's the rule of the eighth? The eighth house is terrors and horrors, in the moon sign, right? So okay, so let's see what's connecting. We didn't do that yet. So what's connecting? Moon and Venus. Moon and Venus are connecting, right? Moon at 10, Venus at 13. Let's see. Mars, Saturn, right? Venus and Moon have both left the Mars. And I am going to give it this, I'm going to give this Mercury to the Jupiter, knowing that it's the next thing that will happen. Is that the Mercury will sextile the Jupiter, but I don't generally do these out of silence, but I'm going to do that. Okay, so once again, this is our disregards. Our disregards are Saturn to Venus and Moon, Mars to Venus and Moon, right? Saturn, let's see, Moon to, no, not to Saturn, I mean Sun to, yeah, Sun hasn't really touched anybody. Okay, so that's what's going on with this chart. So we can continue to just make more and more different ideas or understandings of what we think is happening based on just some of these 4, 5, 6 things, or these 4 things that we're talking about, just based on that. Now, Eulig, let's see what Eulig said she was, because I was asking for a bunch of different things. Eulig is living in a country different from her own, and also had a planet in the 11th. Okay. If you can't see the chart, text me or chat me. Okay, so I would definitely give the Jupiter, 6 degrees, even less than 6 degrees, I'll give this Jupiter, and I would definitely give the Neptune and the Mercury. The sun pretty close, but definitely the Saturn. And not the Venus, but maybe the moon, but maybe not. Okay, so unequivocally, Neptune and Mercury and Saturn and Pluto, obviously, right? So those are unequivocal. Iffy, the sun, the Jupiter, the Venus. Now, what's connecting? We've got moon connecting to Venus. We've got moon connecting to Jupiter. We've got sun connecting to Jupiter. Okay, right? So we started with moon the fastest. Moon is connecting to Venus at 8, Jupiter at 8. 8 Aries versus 8 Leo, which of course is a trine relationship. Venus is then connecting to Jupiter, right? And that's in what we call a partile trine. Partile means exact, and so it's exact. Well, usually partile means exact to the minute and to the minute and the degree, but they're in the exact degree, so we can call that partile. So that's a partile trine, and it is still applying because she's at 30 minutes and he's at 59. Okay, so she's faster, he's slower, she's still lower in longitude than he is. Sun 2, he's at 7:59, Jupiter's at 8:59. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, now who's it? Mercury? What about Mercury? Mercury join anybody? Doesn't look like it. Oh wait, we've got one more connection. Mars is connecting to Jupiter too. So what does that say? We should definitely be considering this Jupiter as angular, shouldn't we? Because everybody's zooming him. So what does Jupiter represent in this chart? 5th house. So that's children and sensual delights and pleasures and things that we like. And he represents also the 8th house. So this could also be a house of fears or terrors that are in the 8th that are connected to the person as well. And look at how so they could be fears about children, right? The Pluto's in the 5th. Anyway, but the 8th, what is it? Venus, the moon, the sun, the Mars, all aspecting this Jupiter. So that's what's going on with, look, so every chart has its own narrative. Every chart has its own thing. And once again, as far as translation is concerned, this moon would be translating Venus, like, because, you know, if the moon were even further, then she would be translating this Venus to Jupiter. And the fact is also that when the moon gets to Jupiter, Jupiter will collect the Mars and the Venus, right? The moon won't be able to give him the sun's light. The sun will do it on his own, but he'll get the moon, Venus's, and Mars's light. Okay, so you see, I mean, look, we're already at 2:43. We just started. It's been 30 minutes. This is how the kind of the slog. We're kind of slogging through. That's why I'm kind of thinking we don't need to kind of try to be super linear about it. We can just be thorough. We can just get into it and get into the damn weeds around it, because this is how you should probably be looking at it. Or this is a way to be looking at charts now, right? The very first thing you can say is, okay, so now we've gone through all 5 charts. And we've even looked and we saw the translation and the collections, right? So we can go to now, back to the sheet. And look at our next ones. So we looked at transfer of light, on Natal, and we looked at collection or aggregation, right? The collection of light. So once again, translation of light, I think, did I write it out here? But we saw that. Well, does he do it with, it comes to be 2 ways. A light planet would be separated from a weighty one and would be joined to another, and would transfer the nature of one from which it is being separated to the one which it is being joined. Okay, so that's basically kind of what we already looked at. And then aggregation or collection, that's if 2 or 3 planets are applying themselves to some star situated in its own place. Okay, now that's a different thing altogether. Whereas if 2 or more are being joined to one planet and it collects their lights and receives their nature. Remember, join just means any aspect. It doesn't mean conjunction. So that was what we just looked at, those first 6, right? Let's see, aggregate. Yeah, the 6th is collection or aggregation. So we got to 6 of the 16. 6 of the 16. Now let's look at number 7. Number 7 is prohibition, which we haven't seen yet, and which I haven't really looked for. Let's kind of talk about blocking and prohibition for a second and how it happens. So it can happen in 2 ways. It can happen by conjunction, and when I finally find a chart where it's really showing that, I will be sure and find you. I'll be sure and show you. I'm usually good at finding chart examples of what we talk about. So it can either happen by conjunction, and that's you've got 3 planets, and you've got a fast one, a slow one, and then a slower than the fast one. Right. So here's an example. Venus is at 8, Mars is at 12. Jupiter is at 13. Before Venus gets to Jupiter, even though she's faster, Mars is going to perfect his sextile, his conjunction to Jupiter. So before she can get there, he's going to get there, and that means he will prohibit her from getting there. So that means, and if you remember, we used this connection, we used this the last time. If we're asking about, am I pregnant? First of all this stuff is in Gemini, that would be kind of one aspect to say maybe not. But if Mars is just, Venus were the ruler of the 1st and Jupiter were the ruler of the 5th for some reason, then, and so we're saying, oh yeah, look, there's going to be that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. They're both benefics, and there's going to be that conjunction, even though Jupiter's in his detriment, and Gemini's a sterile sign, but hey, that's going to happen, and but oh, wait a minute, Mars is going to come and fuck that up for us. And that means, no, it's not going to happen. And the same thing here. If it were going to happen by square, Venus was going to Jupiter by square, and Mars was at 12 Pisces going by trine, and he was going to get there first by trine before she got there by square. That's prohibition. We'll be on the lookout for these things when we come back to the chart. But for right now, okay, now we're going to come back to reception. Because this is a major thing, and you'll see how major it is for me, because I ended up writing a void of course is another thing that we'll come to. But before we come to void of course, and to also this return of virtue, I just want to talk about the different types of reception, because there's so many kinds. And reception involves pushing. So reception involves pushing. There are 2 types of what we consider there's the classic reception, which is actually what we call pushing nature. And we'll talk about that in a second. Then there is what we actually just call a blah, blah, blah with reception, a trine with reception, etc. Then there is what we call pushing power. Then there is what they call pushing of 2 natures, but which we're not going to really use. And then pushing management. I'm going to start with pushing management for a second. This is one of the ones that's listed. Now, I'm going out of order. I'm going out of order now because reception and all of the things that have to do with pushing have to do with reception. They're all one subject. So anything that has to do with pushing has to do with reception. Anything that has to do with reception is going to involve pushing. So the first thing to understand is that only applying planets can push. So write that down if you're using pencil and paper or typing or whatever. Only applying planets can push. This is, oh wow, that's a tongue twister. So that's something that I myself just really got clear about. Only applying planets can be pushers. So that means that a planet that's, we'll get to in a second, okay? And so, but what I want to start with is this issue of pushing management. Pushing management is essentially when, let's see, pushing, yeah, here we go. Pushing management does not require any kind of dignity. No, all of the other pushing are forms of reception, and reception involves intermingling of planetary dignities, essential dignities, specifically domicile and exaltation, or never mind, domicile and exaltation specifically for right now. Okay, but for pushing management, that's not necessary. We're going to get into pushing nature. We're going to get into pushing power. But pushing management for right now is really basically when the planet pushes its significations based on its house rulerships to another planet. And this is what we look at all the time. When I say, oh, hey, what planet is advancing? Oh, it's Mars. What houses does he rule? That's what I'm talking about. Pushing management does not require any kind of dignity relationship. In other words, pushing management takes place in every connection. Every connection means what? Applying aspect. Although its import might be overshadowed by the special effects of pushing nature, which we're going to talk about, or power, and when there are no dignities involved, it is the only thing which happens. We're going to get into all of this in a second. Pushing management impresses the rulership duties of the pusher. Okay, so let's talk about pushing nature and pushing power, and then we'll come back to pushing management in a second, but I just want to repeat that. Pushing management, and remember, what did we say? Only applying planets can push. Which also means, now this is new-ish territory for me, because this is going to create a complete, this is really something to experiment with as far as I'm concerned, and I'm looking at it very, very closely. Pushing management impresses the rulership duties of the pusher on the planet it's pushing onto. Anyway, let's look at the three different things. Pushing nature impresses the natural features of the pushing planet. Pushing power impresses its capability and authority. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, let's return. Hold on. Okay, here are the two types, or here are types of reception. Actually, I had another, wait, hold on one second, sorry. Just find it, because I put all of this reception stuff, I thought, in one place. There we go. Two types of reception by connection was right after it, figures. Okay, so the classic reception is called pushing nature. So it also is pushing nature. That's when planet A, and I'm going to use my chart as an example. My sun is in Capricorn. Planet A is in the sign of planet B. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Saturn would be my planet B. My sun is at 10 degrees of Capricorn. My Saturn is at 12 degrees of Pisces. My sun is applying to Saturn and thus pushing nature. My sun is thus pushing his nature onto Saturn. So that is a classic reception when planet A is in the sign of planet B and is applying to planet B. And here you have this other example. Venus is in Sagittarius, applying to Jupiter because Jupiter rules Sagittarius in Aquarius. All right, reverse reception. Now this is just as strong, it's just not the classic reception. This is what I said about this would be a sextile with reception. Planet A applies to planet B, who is in the sign of planet A. So this example would be, so for instance, that means if my sun were in Aquarius, my sun were in Scorpio and Mars were in Leo, or any planet were in Leo, right? It wouldn't matter, any planet were in Leo. So in this particular one, Venus is still in Sagittarius, but she's applying to Mars and Libra. So there's a sextile. She's not pushing nature because he's not in her sign. I mean, she's not in his sign, right? Sorry about that. She's not, let me repeat it. She is not pushing nature because she is not in his sign. This example. but she is in a sextile with reception because he, Mars, is in her sign. So I'm going to repeat it again. With this particular example of Venus and Sagittarius applying to Mars and Libra, she is not pushing nature because Venus is not in the sign of Mars. She is in the sign of Jupiter, and she's applying to Mars. But she is in a sextile with reception because Venus is in a sextile to Mars, who is in Libra, which she rules. That's the two types of reception by connection. We're going to look at this in a second. Okay, there's reception by whole sign. Of course, that means, moon is in Taurus, Venus is in Cancer, Sun is in Sagittarius, Jupiter is in Leo, right? So they're just they don't have to be, it's not as strong, but as you can see, what's going on, this is a mutual reception. Moon is in Taurus, Venus is in Cancer. Sun is in Sagittarius, Jupiter is in Leo. They don't have to be in exact aspect for it to actually be a reception, but if it's an applying aspect, it's the strongest. If it's a separating aspect, it's less strong. And if there is no aspect, then it's a reception, but it's only a reception by sign. That's what this is talking about. Received benefics produce a stronger good. And we talked about this. The first and most important thing that reception does is guarantee perfection of a matter. What is it we're looking for? What causes things to perfect? That's what this entire consideration number 4. Remember, this is number whatever the hell in consideration 4. And consideration 4 is what makes things come to be, or what makes things not come to be? What makes things happen or go kersplat? What is it that happens? How do you see that in a chart? How do you figure that out? And this is how. This is one of those ways. So what he says is the first and most important thing to remember about reception is that it guarantees perfection of a matter. So that means that's why not all squares are malefic. We talked about that during the medieval course. Right? Not all squares are malefic, because if you've got squares with good reception, then things can come to be, because what do receptions do? They guarantee perfection of a matter. That's what we should be researching, in my opinion. That's what I'm thinking is so important about why. That's why I'm going into all of this, and that's why I'm thinking this is important, because now we can see. Because also the other thing, remember we showed those charts where people were having illnesses and they were getting their detriments and falls from the planets. So it's exact opposite. If a planet is getting their own sign, it's good. If a planet is getting their detriment or fall, it's to the negative. So how these receptions really end up affecting things. Received benefics produce a stronger good, obviously, right? Received malefics impede less, makes more sense. This also goes then to what I've said about any planet can become, what do I call it? Functionally benefic or functionally malefic, right? That then means that based on the aspect, based on not just the aspect, but based on the sign relationships between the planets, things that we think of as being malefic can be less so. Now, the opposition, I still think that that's a difficult one, even when there's mutual reception. Like I've got Jupiter, Mercury in Gemini and Sagittarius and mutual reception, and it's still a challenge. So I still think that the opposition is difficult, but the square, everything else with reception, I really think that, so I'm taking some time. Once again, I want to take some time with this. We're going to go to these charts and we're going to look at them. But what we just looked at was the classic reception, which is pushing nature. We're going to look at pushing power in a second. So the classic reception, which is pushing nature, which is when planet A is in the sign of planet B and is also applying to planet B. And then an aspect with reception, which is when planet A is applying to planet B, who is in the sign of planet A. All right? Reception takes away the evil from a situation so that a planet's signification will not suffer, even if it is in a bad place. You might want to write that down. because that's what we're looking. That's what is so interesting and important to me about this. All right. Reception takes evil away from the situation so that a planet's signification will not suffer, even if it is in a bad place. Is it true? Can that really happen? Jury's out. I'm up to looking to see if that happens or not. Okay, now pushing power, which is virtue or strength. Oh, that's actually regular strength. But pushing power is when, okay, so that's pushing. Oh wait, it's pushing of disposition. That's management. Hold on one second. Pushing power. Okay, a gift of power or pushing of strength is that a planet would be in its own proper domicile or its exaltation, and it would be joined. What does join mean? Applying. It would be joined to another planet and it would push its own strength onto it. Okay? So that means, did we get to it? So the things that are pushed, we've talked about nature is pushed. Power is pushed. We just talked about nature, so now power. So an example of pushing power would be, my moon is in Cancer at 12, and it's applying to the trine of Venus in Pisces at 14. That means that my moon would push power onto Venus. Okay, so that's an example. Remember, only planets that are applying can push. So the three things that this two natures thing we're not going to look at. The three things that we're looking at are nature, power, and management. And remember, so let's actually come to some charts and we'll see if we can find, matter of fact, I know that we definitely saw some pushing natures. Okay, we'll kill. So first of all, we've got the Sun and Jupiter sign. And if indeed the Sun were close enough to be trining Jupiter, then we would have pushing what? Nature, because then planet A would be in the sign of planet B and going to planet B. What we do have here, instead, too bad, because we would also have it here. If indeed, no, we wouldn't, sorry. No, we wouldn't, never mind, sorry about that. This is what we're looking for. Okay, Venus here, remember we want to do it not but just by domicile. It's not just if it's in the, so it's not just if it's in the domicile of planet B, right? If we're talking about pushing nature. Right? Pushing nature is when a planet is in the sign of planet B, planet A is in the sign of planet B, and it's applying. It can also be in the exaltation of planet B, which Venus is. Venus is in Capricorn, which is the exaltation of Mars. Venus is applying to the sextile of Mars. This is pushing nature by exaltation. And then Mars is in his own sign. Now, I always thought that any planet that was in its own sign, that was in an aspect, was pushing power. That was that's why this is somewhat different for me. And technically what we could say is she's pushing nature and he's pushing power. But I'm going to stick with this. I want to experiment with this. I want to experiment with and stick with this idea of it's the planet that's applying, that's doing the pushing, and how that is important and different. So in this particular case, Venus is pushing at Mars. So so what's pushing? 10 and 4 by sextile, right? The part of fortune is pushing to the 10th house by sextile. What else? 5 and 11 by sextile, right? So 4 and 10 by sextile, 5 and 11 by sextile. It would make me wonder what's going on with that. It should be useful. It should be useful, right? Because Venus-Mars in the sextile is a useful and helpful aspect, and then Venus is a benefic planet and giving him also his exaltation. This is going to be especially useful for Mars. So so when we finally get to, matter of fact, that's something that I want to make sure I get away from reception quickly enough so that we can get to strength and weakness. because that's another huge, those are the last two topics and they're humongous, right? And so we'll talk about that in a second, the strength and weakness of the planets, which we talked a little bit about earlier, but now we'll really get into it. Okay, so any other kind of thing, let's see. Nope, doesn't look like it. Nope, that's it. That's our example in this chart. I wonder if I don't need to stop I might just be able to go straight to it. I think I'm going to try it. Okay, so we're only looking for, we're looking for pushing nature, pushing power. Oh, we haven't looked at pushing management. We do need to do that. Okay, so we've got, so we're going to have the opportunity to push power, possibly, because the moon is in Cancer and she's the fastest planet, which means she can apply to everybody. So we're going to have pushing. As a matter of fact, we know we have pushing management, because if I'm not mistaken, we're not pushing management. We know we have pushing power because the moon's applying to Saturn. So the moon is pushing her power onto Saturn. Now, is that a good thing for Saturn? In this particular case, not necessarily, because Cancer is the what? Detriment of Saturn. Capricorn is his sign, his domicile. Cancer is the detriment. So that's going to be a little bit fraught. So even though moon is pushing power, Saturn doesn't really like her domain at all. He doesn't like her emotionality and her changeability and any of that kind of stuff. Saturn is really about, the slow, the steady, the laborious, the boring, the painstaking, the heavy. So he will do that to her, but she'll also, but he'll make it. There's going to be emotional heaviness to this chart, right? Because she's pushing this emotional flow of the moon onto him, and he's in a water sign already, so he's already kind of mucking through, kind of swamping, mucking through, and then she's pushing more of that on him. This is, look at Scorpio rising too, so it's got all this kind of water weird stuff going on. And then everything ruled by Saturn, which means that everything is ruled by this Saturn trine, this moon Saturn trine. And then we also know that, oh, baby, we've got both. Sun is applying to the sextile of Saturn. Sun is in the sign of Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn. So this chart has both pushing nature. The sun is pushing its nature onto Saturn, and then it's got pushing power. Moon is pushing its power onto Saturn. Now, pushing management means that the moon is pushing her 8th house connection onto him, and then the sun is pushing his 9th house connection onto him. Now, what did Holistic Star tell us about themselves? Holistic Star says, lives overseas from birthplace, 9th house travel, planets in the 8th house. It was one of those things, we were just looking for planets in the 8th house, but lives overseas from the, so we have the 9th affecting the Saturn, and we've got the 8th affecting the Saturn. So this is very interesting. So that's interesting to me in that particular case. All right, so so we've got both. So let's look at that one more time, y'all, because here's your example right here. So when I talk about pushing nature, I say planet A is in the sign of planet B and applying. He's at 14, he's at 19, and applying to the aspect. That's pushing nature. Perfect example. I'm at 12 and 14, so this is exactly like my chart. Then we've got pushing power here. Planet A is in its own sign and is applying to planet B. And so we've got planet A, the sun doing pushing nature, and the moon doing pushing power. And then we just gave examples of what pushing management would be in this particular case. Okay. Excellent chart for that. Wow, fantastic. That was the best. That was super fantastic. That was really wonderful, wunderbar. That was exactly what we needed. Okay, RLW 1900. So we're just looking for the receptions. Pushing nature, and it can be either the pushing nature or the aspect with reception, or pushing power, or push and we know every connection has pushing management in it now. Okay, so we know that there is a pushing management between the moon and Venus, right? And the moon is pushing her sign. What do they call it? Her rulership duties. Pushing her rulership duties onto Venus. Venus is ruler of the ascendant in this case. So the first thing that's happening is the moon is pushing the fourth house onto this Venus. Okay, so she's pushing the fourth house onto this Venus, and she's making sure that this Venus does her duties, puts everything where it's supposed to be, doesn't have time to express and lovey-dovey herself and self-care and all that kind of thing. There'd be a lot of duty involved in this chart. Okay, so we know already, here's some pushing management. Now, is there anything, oh wait, we've got Saturn in his own sign. So is anything applying to Saturn? The Mars is, right? It's wide, but the Mars is applying. And that means but Mars needs to be in his own sign, right? Or he would need to be in what? Saturn's sign. Or Saturn would need to be in what? His sign. Or Saturn could be in what? His exaltation. Mars is applying to Saturn. Saturn is in his exaltation. This is a trine with reception. So we just have perfect examples of all. We had a great example of pushing nature with the Sun and Saturn. We had in the last chart, we had a great example of pushing power with the Moon and Saturn in the last chart. We just had an excellent example of a trine with reception. Right? It's reception, it's just not pushing, right? Because Mars isn't pushing, Mars is just being received by this Saturn from his exaltation. So Saturn is receiving Mars from Mars's exaltation. Anything else? Ooh, now if this Jupiter were further along, we could say that Jupiter might be doing something. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I never even looked at this. Look at this. Mars is trining Jupiter, sextiling Jupiter. That's the next aspect of Jupiter, the Mars is making. Mars 022. But this is one of those examples of something that's not so useful. This is great. All these charts are so good. So I'm so glad that we're not just kind of just doing your charts, because I really want to be able to kind of do a thing about just kind of be looking at these things with everybody's charts, because everything has a different narrative. Everything has something different in it. So here's an example of this negative reception I'm talking about. Mars is sextiling Jupiter. Jupiter is exalted. That should be fabulous. Except that Mars is in Virgo, which is the detriment of Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Cancer, which is the fall of Mars. This is not a useful sextile. Now, the other thing to know is that Jupiter and Mars are enemies. Jupiter actually hates Mars. He does not like him at all. So if they're going to be in some kind of aspect, they need to be in an aspect where they're going to receive each other at least. In this particular thing, there's negative reception. They can do damage to each other, in my opinion, and it can easily be done because of the sextile. And so this is what I mean when I talk about how, when we think about sextiles and trines, people are so busy thinking good and bad, but it's really easy and difficult. And that means that squares and oppositions can make good things difficult, or can make the path to good things difficult. And trines and sextiles can make the path to bad things easy. And so let's see what we're talking about here. So it's the ruler of the 7th house, and it's the ruler of the 8th and 9th in this chart, and the ruler of the 11th, of the 12th. That is the 2nd, 3rd, and what is it, the 6th? So that could lead to the 6th from the 7th, right? Because Mars is the ruler of the 7th. that could lead to problems, financial problems as a result of illnesses between the person, the person that's between RLW 1900s significant other. That could possibly be something that could happen, is how I'm seeing that. Definitely there could be issues with money. There could be issues where there should be quite a bit of money, but it might not go to good ends, or they might not be good with it or use it well, right? Because the sextile, it's working easily, but it's not working usefully because of the negative receptions. Be interesting to get some kind of background from these people, but that's a perfect example. So we've just seen some other ones. We've seen some other really good examples. This one between Saturn and Mars, which is the trine with reception, this negative reception between Mars and Jupiter. And then last, there's this pushing power of Jupiter to Saturn. So Jupiter is pushing power to Saturn. However, excuse me, Saturn's in Jupiter's fall. So that might not be so useful for Jupiter, but it's useful for Saturn, but not necessarily useful for Jupiter. Okay, so that's how. So this is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm interested in and looking at. When I'm looking at a chart myself, I'm looking at these receptions. I'm trying to see if these receptions matter or not. You know, that's my main thing. Do they really matter? Do I really care? You know, are they showing up or not? Wicked. Just being sure. Okay. So everything's in Scorpio, practically, right? Oh, one thing's in Aquarius. Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, is in Libra. So here's something. A lot of people consider this a mutual reception. Venus is in Scorpio, Mars is in Libra. This would not be considered a mutual reception by as far as ancient terminology is concerned. It would be called in each other's generosity. But because the signs don't aspect each other, it's not a true reception. Because remember, the strongest reception is actually an aspect, right? It's a reception with an applying aspect. If there can't be an aspect, then it's not really a strong reception. So what receptions are happening here? We have none, really. Well, so what we will have is pushing management. We've got the moon leaving the Saturn, right? So we got the disregard, I mean, not the Saturn, the Jupiter. The moon's leaving disregarding the Jupiter, as is the sun. Oh, here we go. The Venus is applying to the Jupiter. Now, here's a perfect example of another thing, which is an aspect where there is no reception of any kind. Okay, so this square would be malefic, in my opinion, right? Even though it's between two benefics, but you know what I'd say with Jupiter and Venus? Too much of a good thing. So this could definitely be a too much of a good thing chart and it could be something that leads to physical illness, right? Rich foods or sweet foods that lead to physical illness, or, you know, it's the physical body. So it's something that affects the body. 11th house, it could also be issues with friends. 8th house, it could also be lover's money. Oh, and this was the one we talked about, right? Where was the lover's money? There's issue with the partner's finances, where there might be the person may end up with the person who's got money, and then there are issues. And so, but sure enough, so even this Venus Jupiter kind of connects to it. So Venus would be pushing her, right? It's pushing management only. So do we have, you know, let me know in the chat if you're like, what the hell? Or if you're cool with, if you're not cool with where I am or whatever, if I need to go back to it, because I am kind of zipping through it, I guess, on some level, but I am but I feel like using the examples is kind of useful. And I just want to be sure that they are, because at this particular point, I've kind of shown a bunch of different things. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go back for a second and go back through what we looked at. And the best one to start with is through this one. So we looked at pushing nature, which is when planet A is in the sign of planet B and is also applying to the aspect of planet B. And here we have that. Sun is in Capricorn, applying to Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn. And then we had pushing power, where a planet is in its own sign or exaltation, and it is applying to any other planet. And it pushes its power onto that planet. So the moon here has pushing power. The sun is pushing nature. The moon is pushing power. Okay? Then we looked to see, and also what we call this pushing nature, we call this the classic reception, right? So when planet A is in the sign of planet B and applying to planet B, that's a classic reception, otherwise known as pushing nature. When planet A is in its own sign and applying to any planet, that is pushing power. Then we went to this chart. Or did we go to another one? Hold on. Okay, hold on. Oh, I see we got a chat. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, Mariah. Mariah just left. All right. Wait, where is that other one where we had that great reception without, oh, here we go. Okay, here we have a trine with reception. Mars applying to Saturn, who is in his own exaltation. Okay, so that's our just applying aspect with reception. Then we had, last but not least, did we get to this one yet? Or was the one that was wicked? This one. Then we had a square without reception. We had, so this is where we stopped, because that's where we are. We had a square without reception. So we had pushing nature, we've had pushing power, everything is pushing management, right? And what pushes? Only the applying aspect, only the applying planet is the one pushing. What's the applying planet? The applying planet is the faster planet who's at a lower degree and aspecting another planet, okay? Here between Venus and Jupiter, we've got an applying square, we've got a connection or conjunction, etc., an applying square, but we have no reception, right? Jupiter's in Aquarius, which is not really where he's peregrine essentially, and Venus is in Scorpio, where she's either peregrine or she's in detriment. So, and neither of them are in each other's sign, or they don't fulfill any of the other criterion. So this is just a good old-fashioned square. So this is my point. Not all squares are the same. Not all trines are the same. Remember, we looked at that other trine or sextile. Wait, where was it? Oops, sorry. We looked at that sextile. Where was it? Between Mars and Jupiter, and how the Mars is in Jupiter's detriment and Jupiter is in Mars's fall. And so even though that should be a useful sextile, especially for Mars, it's not really, or it's useful for mischief. It's useful for making mischief, and makes me wonder what kind of mischief it is. So just such fascinating stuff. And then last is Eulig. Let me just make sure everybody can see Eulig. Okay. Oh, this was the one where everybody was going towards Jupiter, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. Okay, so in this particular case, this is similar. These are all, there's this trine between Mars and Moon and Jupiter and Venus and Jupiter, no reception. This opposition between Mars and Jupiter, no reception. The square between, there we go. The square between Sun and Jupiter is a square with reception. Why? Because planet A is applying to planet B, who is in the sign of planet A. So all of the others are just run-of-the-mill, or just, so the implications are interesting if we really think about it, because trine should be great. A trine without reception is still okay. I mean, especially trying to Jupiter, yay, right? But it would be really even a better trine if it were here, Pisces to Cancer, wouldn't it? Because then the moon would be in Jupiter's sign and Jupiter would be in the moon's sign. There would be a mutual reception. And imagine if it were a mutual reception and then Venus would be exalted. So she'd be pushing, so Venus would be pushing power, moon would be in mutual reception. That's a really fucking powerful trine. This is a good trine. Yeah. We love it. We'd love to see it, but it's not the same as that one. And this is what I'm interested in figuring out. Okay. So if you have any questions on reception, put it in the chat now because I'm going to move on. I think I was pretty thorough around that. And I mean, I don't know if I did anything totally new as far as it was concerned, but I felt like it was right at the end of the session and we really needed to kind of get to whatever we were looking at. So we looked at barring and prohibition, reception, void of course, which we know. Okay, so void of course, let's just talk about that for a second. Void of course is especially important for the moon, but it can be important for any other planet as well. Because if a planet is void of course, that means nothing is happening to it, especially the moon. And remember, the moon, and it's important for the moon because remember, the moon is the mediatrix that transmits the celestial influences down to Earth. That means that when she touches Jupiter, she transmits him down. When she touches Mars, when she opposes Mars, she transmits that opposition to Mars down. When she trines Jupiter, like she just does in that chart, then she transmits that down. When she ain't doing nothing, nothing is happening. Things go fallow. And so that's what's basically going on here. Emptying of course is if a planet would be separated from the conjunction of another planet by conjunction or by aspect, and it would not be joined to another so long as it were in that same sign. So that's especially important for the moon, and we'll look for that too. Now, this one I wasn't able to find, granting or permission. I'm not sure, unless it's listed under something else, but it was the only one that I couldn't find in the Al-Kabizi book, which had everything else. And all of it with the Arabic, which was fantastic. And so I was really able to kind of, and that's what, as a matter of fact, everything that's underneath these is from, so this is all from the Bonatii, and the stuff underneath is pasted in from the Al-Kabizi book. Okay, so return of virtue or disposition. Now, there's two ways that it's returned. I just want to, now there's a bunch of different ways that it can happen, and I don't want to get too deep into it with you for right now. We'll come back to it because this is kind of complex. Okay, basically, when a planet returns its virtue, it's either combust or retrograde. And basically what it says is if a planet, let's say planet A is applying to planet B, and planet B is being combusted by the sun. Planet B will return its virtue to planet A. And planet B can either return it with fitness or with detriment, and that's based on the positioning of the planets. So we'll talk about that in a second. Now, so there's two ways, once again. Planet A needs to be applying to planet B. Planet B needs to be either retrograde or combust. Okay, now, as you can see, if a planet is with fitness, if a planet is pushing planet by, okay, actually, I'm going to use my, I can't because it's not applying. I was going to use my own because I have retrograde planets and planets applying to it. Although you could say that, in my chart that, hold on a second, let me get my chart. I'll give you an example of what I think it's talking about. Oh shit. Figures. All right. Okay. Okay, so what it says is, let's say planet Planet B is retrograde or combust. Planet A is applying to planet B. Planet B will then return its virtue to planet A because it can't accept the virtue. It can't accept it. So that's especially, think if it's like in this particular case, Mercury is pushing nature to Jupiter, right? Because Mercury is in Jupiter's sign. So Jupiter can't receive it fully, right? Although, even though they're in mutual reception, Jupiter's in retrograde, so he can't fully receive it, always. Now, once again, what did I say? Anything can work on the personal level in a natal chart. You're taking this class with me, right? I'm not taking this class with you guys. You guys are taking it with me. So the Mercury Jupiter is working somehow, right? It's not completely fucked, but so that's another thing we're trying to figure out. What do these things work? What do these things don't work? Is this return of virtue a thing? Is it not? It's the first I've ever heard of it, and I'm interested in seeing if it works or not. Now, here's the thing. Remember, there's return with fitness and there's return with detriment. Now, this is returning to the Mercury, but the Mercury is essentially angular, and that's the difference. When the planet that it's being returned to is angular or succeedent, then it's returning with fitness. If the planet that it's being returned to is in a Caden house, then it's returning with detriment. So let's say the Mercury were at 15 or 10 degrees of Sag instead, or 15, or yeah, let's say 15, then that would be less so of a kind of that would be a return with detriment. So maybe part of the issue about the intelligence that whatever might be lost in the return of virtue is not happening so badly because it's happening with fitness. We'll come back to this. I know this is complex. We'll come back to this, but this is really interesting. And we will, since it's one of the 16 points in the consideration, it's something that we should look at. I just wanted to kind of touch on this as something, that I will definitely be like, oh wait, look, there's blah blah blah, yay. So that's something I'll be looking for. Okay, so return with fitness. Planet B receives the pushing from planet A. Pushing planet is direct in course, which my Mercury was. Planet B is combust, and both are in an angular succeeding houses. That's exactly what's going on with mine. Okay, so that was what was happening. So in my particular case, I have planet B, right? Because planet B is receiving pushing planet A. And then I have the second one, which was pushing planet is direct in course. Planet B is combust or retrograde, and both are in an angular succeeding houses. Okay, so and then the third way that it can be with fitness is planet B is combust or retrograde or cadent from the angles, and the pushing planet is angular or succeedent, right? So I have really what I have is I have 1 and 3. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So that's what return with fitness. And as you can see here, if planet A is cadent and B is angular succeedent, or both of them are combust or cadent, then that would be return with detriment. So that's an interesting thing that I didn't really know anything about, that we will look at. We will look at and look for. These are all things to be looking at and looking for. We were just looking at the pushing virtue, pushing of disposition, which is pushing management. So we were just in all the reception of pushing. Okay, so good. Oh, good. So for the last 40 minutes, we will look at virtue or strength and weakness. And this is just of the planets. Okay, so these are the ways in which a planet can be made fortunate. So, bodily conjunction, trine, square, or sextile to the benefics. Now before we did all of this stuff about reception, before we did all this stuff about reception, the square might not have made so much sense, would it? Would it? No, it wouldn't have made so much sense. But now it does, because we know that squares can happen with reception. And we know that, for instance, a Venus can be in Gemini and square a Jupiter in Pisces, and that would be a reception. And that would be one of those classic, no, the opposite of the classic, right? Where it's a square with reception, because Jupiter is in her exaltation, also in his own sign. Malefics cadent from a planet. That's how a planet can be strengthened. The malefics are cadent from it. So that means that if you have, goodness, I wonder, I know what I'm going to do. We're going to go through this list, then I'm going to put up the chart, and then I'm going to read from this list with a chart up, and we'll see what we can find. Separated from a fortune and joining another fortune. So that's kind of like a besiegement. Besieged by fortunes is kind of the same thing. Now, besiegement, we'll talk about that in a second, because besiegement is its own thing, and it's very important, in my opinion. And we'll talk about besiegement. Maybe we're not going to get to it today, but we'll maybe go into besiegement. We'll go in, you know what, we're going to go into besiegement when we do the next one, which is on the moon. It looks like we're going to get to the moon tomorrow, next week. And so then consideration 5. So it looks like we will get to consideration 5, which is the 16 or 17 ways in which the moon can be impeded. And so this kind of brings us full circle to my very first, it will bring us full circle rather to my very first workshop, which was about the position of the moon in the chart and how important it is or not. So malefics cadent from a planet, that's something we don't really think about. Separated from a fortune, joining another, besieged by fortunes, sextile or trine the sun. The sun is considered a benefic, except when it's in conjunction or opposition to a planet. Aspected by a fortunate moon. Fortunate moon means what? She's in Cancer or Taurus, she's in a good house, she's advancing, right? Increasing in speed and light. Now that's one of the things that I haven't really ever looked at, is the speed of a planet, but I know that that's something that the ancients talk about all the time. Essentially dignified, we know what that means. It's in its domicile or exaltation. Now some of these last ones, or this one, in bright degrees, if any of you were in my class, Anne Louise probably was, if you were in my class where we talked about zodiac signs, we talked about degrees. We talked about the bright degrees, the dark degrees, the pitted degrees, the azimine degrees, or the infirm degrees, and the degrees of increased fortune. And that's what he's talking about. If a planet's in the bright degrees, the planet is received, obviously, in their joys. And we're going to wait to get to the joys fully, because there is a consideration where there are 4 different types of joys for the planets, and we'll talk about those. In highs, we haven't talked about highs in a while, and we need to kind of revisit that. And as a matter of fact, that's where we'll start when we come to the charts today. The luminaries are in the dignities of the fortune. And I thought that's interesting. Luminaries in the dignities of the fortune. For me, I have neither of my luminaries are in the dignities of the fortune. I have Sun in Saturn's dignity, and Moon is in Mars's dignity. So I think that's kind of interesting. And strength of the planets rising in the north. Second station, when they're talking about a second station, they're talking about after retrogradation. So a station is basically what happens when we hear stationary direct. It's basically when the planet stops right before it goes retrograde or right before it goes direct. The first station is when it stops before it goes retrograde. The second station is when it stops right before going direct. And so second station is what they're considering strong. Coming out from under the rays, we talked about that before. So combustion versus under the rays. Angular or succeedent, what does that mean? That's called to be advancing. The 3 superior planets being east of the sun. That's oriental of the sun, meaning they rise and set before the sun, especially if the sun aspects by sextile. In masculine quarters, we'll talk about that another time. Sun in masculine quarters and masculine signs, except Libra. and the 3 inferior planets west of the sun or in feminine quarters. So let's go to our chart and let's look at this list in relation to the chart. That's me. Let's look at, nope, that's me. You like it. Just making sure. Okay, so first, let's see if there's any return. So is anything combust? Nothing is combust. And is anything retrograde? Nothing of any importance is retrograde. So there will not be any return of virtue in this chart. So perfect. We know we can look for it. There's nothing of it. Now, let's look to see what of this list is happening. So what planets are in bodily conjunction, trine, square, or sextile to benefics? The moon. The moon is in a bodily conjunction to Venus and a trine to Jupiter. So this moon is highly, on some level, even though she's not in essential dignity, remember that was part of the list, even though she's not in her essential dignity, the moon is actually really, really well fortified by this conjunction to Venus and this trine to Jupiter. So let's just stick with her for a second. Let's see if there's anyone else. Sun is, because the sun is squaring a benefic with reception. Remember, the very first one on the list is in bodily conjunction, trine, square, or sextile to benefics, meaning that both the moon, Venus in this particular case, and the sun are, they're strengthened by this connection. Moon, Venus, sun. Now, the thing is, the moon especially, because she's connected to both of them, right? She's connected to both of them. She's in connection to both. She's applying to both. And she's really, really super close. And then also the sun, because he's applying to both, but not the Mars, right? It was sextile, square, or trine. It was not the opposition. And we also know that Mars and Jupiter are enemies, right? And that the opposition is a enmity. It's an what do we call it? Aspect of enmity. So we know already that there's going to be problems. 8th house, 9th house, 4th house. Where's the other one? 9th, 8th, 9th, 4th, 5th. There's going to be problems in those areas. There's going to be issues. And also there's no reception. There's nothing to help it. No reception here, but it's a trine. Nice. No reception here. So what happens? That means that impedes. That's going to be a weakness. That's going to be on the weakness list for Jupiter. Right? I can just, because if trines and squares and sextiles to benefics are something that are good for a planet, then I bet you that squares and oppositions and conjunctions to malefics are something that are not. Weakness of planet, slow, first station, retrograde, detriment or fall. Let's see here. Join to a retrograde. Wait. Join to a planet in detriment. Join to conjoining, squaring, misfortune of the planets, conjoining, squaring, or opposing a malefic. So right now that needs to be one of the first things to think about. Because this is the other thing. What I notice in modern astrology is nobody can discern how good a planet is or bad a planet is. Partially because everybody is saying there is no good and no bad, right? No, everybody's saying, oh, well, no placement is good or bad, blah, 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 blah. That's fucking bullshit. That's fucking bullshit as far as we're concerned. There are bad placements. There are good placements. There are really good placements and really bad placements in this chart, right? The Moon and the Venus are very well placed, are fortified, are well fortified. The Jupiter is being mistreated, is impeded. right? He's being, on one level, he's getting, probably the good influences are better for him than the negative, but he's certainly not receiving, not all of his influences are enjoyable. Whereas as far as the moon is concerned, she's happy. She should be happy. Now, what's interesting though, is she's the ruler of the 12th, which is self-undoing. And look, there's some part of fortune. So it may not be the self-undoing. This might be a researcher, somebody who loves to work in solitude and do things in solitude. So they could find all of the stuff that they love when they're alone and in solitude and doing the things that they love. So, but the moon is getting what they need and want. The moon is highly, highly exalted. Now, that could also mean that there's something going on with the moon that fucks things up for them too, right? Because the ruler of the 12th is so well fortified. So that could mean that there's a whole walled off emotional sense that they can't connect to other people with. Maybe. I mean, we don't know, but it could, you know what I'm saying? It's the 12th house. Something's walled off. So it's either, and the things look so good, it looks like really this person knows how to make their isolation pay off. That we definitely know that. But we also know the 12th house is the house of self-undoing. And so it could be relationships could be a problem, too much, you know, in love with lovedness. There could be an in love with loveness about this person that is an issue or a problem. Okay, so that's how we get to where we get to. Anyway, but where was I going to? Oh, what's good, what's bad, what's strong, what's not so strong. So the sun is fortified, Venus and moon are fortified. Mars is not necessarily fortified, but the Jupiter is impeded by the Mars. Let's go to another chart and go down the line. RLW 1900. I'm just making sure everybody can see it. That's why I keep clicking on it. Okay, we've got a planet in its own sign, right? Essential dignity was on the list. So that's a fortification. We've got a planet applying by bodily conjunction to a benefic, the moon. So that's not a bad thing. We've got a planet in its exaltation. That's a good thing. But we've got a planet opposing, right? Planet opposing a malefic, which is not such a good thing. So once again, we've got a Jupiter that's got good stuff going on, but it's also got bad stuff going on for it. This is important. What we're looking at is really important because when it comes down to, you know, when it comes down to, am I going to have children? And we look at and we look at this Jupiter. So if I were to, if I didn't really know enough, and someone said, am I going to have children? And I just did it based on Jupiter because he rules fertility, right? He's one of the things we're going to look at anyway. And I'd say, ooh, this Jupiter's in a fertile sign of Cancer. It's in its exaltation. Ooh, that's nice. But then I look over here and I say, ooh, it's opposed by Saturn. And you know, Saturn is cold, right? The womb is warm and wet. Saturn is cold and dry, and he's in a cold and dry sign, and he's opposing Jupiter, which is fertility. That's worrisome. That doesn't say it can't happen altogether, but that's worrisome. And then when we actually get to the 5th house and all that other stuff, then that's a whole other thing. But if we were just looking at the Jupiter, we've got to take all of these things into account. That's my main point, is that we have to take all of these ways in which a planet can be affected into account. Hey, what about this malefic's cadent from a planet? Do we have any of that? Malefics that are cadent from a planet? We have not really. Well, what we have is Jupiter's cadent from the sun here. I forgot that the sun is well affected. And you know what? Actually, the sun might be one of the strongest planets in this chart because the sun is in an angle, right? Remember, advancing, the angular succeeding was one of the ways a planet could be fortified. And the sun is also in its own sign. And so essential dignity was one of the ways. And does it have, and look, it's got malefic's cadent. The Saturn is cadent from the sun, right? So the Saturn's in the 6th house from the sun, the 6th sign from the sun. So that we have an example. So the sun, so let's kind of stick with the sun and work with this list. Separated from a fortune and joining another fortune. Is he separating from a fortune? Now, in this particular case, guess what? The sun is void of course. In this case, he would probably be called feral. The sun is feral. So that makes me want, see, narrative. Once again, narrative. That makes me wonder. Feral, fifth house. Remember, we've been talking about this chart in the fifth house, and this is the child sex abuse chart. But we've been talking about this fifth house and this feral. So we got this feral sun ruling the fifth house, right? Nothing is aspecting it. Nothing will aspect it, right? By the time the sun gets to 28, Mercury will be way off in Virgo, right? So nothing, I mean, you know, it'll hit the south node. That's it. So that's interesting. And that's also important. That could be seen as a kind of detriment, but it could be seen in some way as a kind of wild card. So there's this wild card sun in this chart that if we didn't really know what we were looking at, if we weren't looking at it through this lens, we might not be thinking anything of it. But you know, with the South Node there and everything, there's issues around what I enjoy. There's issues around being able to enjoy. There's issues around children, being able to have children, or whether I have children, or something with the kid if they have it, right? Because the fifth house also represents the child. That's how we do what we're doing. So we can honestly say that, yeah, it looks like this is probably the most important. We could say that the Saturn, since he's leaving, since we've got this separating trine from the Venus, but since it's separating, it's not as useful. But but the sun is really, I think, in my opinion, the strongest chart and strongest planet in this chart. Let's look at Wicked. Wicked. All right, so we don't have a lot of planets. Matter of fact, what we've got is we've got planets that they've got misfortune and unfortunate planets. So let's look at that list again. So planets are made fortunate. We know that. We were looking at that. But planets are made unfortunate when they are conjoining, squaring, or opposing a malefic in the domicile or terms of the malefic. So let's just look at those two things for now. Conjoining, squaring, or opposing a malefic in the domicile or terms of the malefic. So conjoining, opposing, squaring a malefic, and in the domicile. So we've got this Saturn, well, really, actually, probably the sun. So it's interesting how the sun has been really important in all of these charts. The sun is applying to a conjunction of the Saturn. We can say, because the sun's got what, 7.5 and 5, 12.5. Okay, yes, so sun definitely is an application. It is also in the sign of a malefic, right? Scorpio is Mars' sign. And I think, okay, so the sun is one of the most, so this is one of the most afflicted planets in the chart right now. The Mars is afflicted because he's in detriment. The Venus is afflicted because she's in detriment, but she's helped by the square to the Saturn, to the Jupiter. Right? But she's not helped that much because the square does not have reception. Do you see now how all the things are coming to work together? Right? I made a humongous point of the fact that there's this Venus-Jupiter square with no reception at all. We just saw that on the list is a planet is fortified by a sextile square or trine to a benefic, which we have in this chart. And we're talking about applying, right? So we've got that going on in this chart, but what we don't have is a reception to really, really be a help. And the Venus, you know, if this were a trine with the Jupiter and Pisces, that would be really much more useful because then it would be her exaltation. Do you see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden we can see how things work or don't work, or whether they're necessary or not necessary, or useful or not necessary, useful or not useful. I won't, you know, it's better to have a connection between them than to have nothing. But this is not the most useful of connections, especially not for her. Well, not for either of them, but she's the one that really needs the help because she's in a Caden house and she's, right, because cadency is another way in which a planet can be impeded. She's in a Caden house and she's in detriment. and she's in the sign of a malefic planet. Okay, so that's okay. So we got that going. Let's see, the malefics are elevated above the planet by 10 or 11, especially without reception, conjoining, squaring, or opposing the sun. So we don't, so basically what they're saying is, let's say there were a planet here, if there were a malefic here or here, that's in 10 or 11 from it, then that would be considered an impediment for that planet. So that means if there were a malefic in Virgo or Leo for Venus, or if there, oh wait, oh shite, Jupiter. There's a malefic in 10 for Jupiter. Get it? Okay, because it's elevated above Jupiter. It's in the 10th house. Saturn is in the 10th house above Jupiter. Culminating, it's called 10th, and this would be the 11th. So the 10th from Jupiter would be Scorpio, because Jupiter's in Aquarius. The 10th from Jupiter would be Scorpio. The 11th would be Sagittarius. Put something in the chat now if you don't understand what I just said. That this is more obscure, but it's interesting. And remember what we were talking about, what we've been talking about with this particular chart. Hardship in relationships, often that have to do with finances. And look at how the Saturn is culminating from this Jupiter, right? They have to do with finances and difficulty with the beloved's finances or the partner's finances. Everything keeps kind of pointing to that for me. If Wicked sees this, I hope we'll get some confirmation. Okay. Okay, let's start. Well, this was the one that had those great pushing examples, right? The pushing nature and the pushing nature and the pushing power example. Excuse me, both towards the Saturn. So obviously the moon is in strongest by its position. However, by its position by sign. However, the moon is in what's called combust degrees. The combust degrees are the 12 degrees opposing the sun's position. So from I guess 26, it'd be from 26 to 14 would be, or from 12 from 10 to 14 or 8 to 14, and then from 14 to 26 would be combust degrees for the moon. And so that is actually not as good. That's something that will come up next week when we talk about the different problems for the moon. Let's see if, oh, wait, look, we've got another planet that's strong. So this planet is strong by sign. Mars is strong by exaltation by sign. He's very, very close to the third house, which would make him Cape. So he's strong by essential dignity, but not by, what's the other? Accidental dignity. Now, is there anything that would make it yummy for him? Like, he's not really close enough to the Jupiter for that to be useful. He's coming out from under the rays. So that's another way in which he's strong. Remember, they talked about if the planet is coming out from under the rays. So he's 14 degrees away from the sun. So at 17 degrees, he'll be, or 15 degrees, he'll be fully out from under the rays. Let's see what someone's asking. Okay, thanks so much, Maria. Well, maybe some Maria's going to leave too. So Anne Louise, maybe we'll stop there. We'll stop with this one. I'll continue with Holistic Star, and then we'll finish with that today. And you can, once again, you can write anything into the chat if you have a question for right now. So let me finish up with him or her, Holistic Star. Okay, so once again, by essential dignity or sign placement, sign strength, the moon and Mars are the strongest. However, look at how the moon and Mars would be at some point in opposition to each other, which would not be particularly useful. The moon's in opposition to the sun. We just said that sextile and trine to the sun is useful, square in opposition to the sun, but especially opposition and conjunction. Rather, conjunction and opposition to the sun is difficult, right? So that's in all cases, especially the moon. So this really looks like, I mean, this Venus is kind of off on her own. Yeah, she's off on her own, not really doing much. Now, remember also that the moon is well placed and it's trining with Saturn. So that's actually a good thing for Saturn, right? Because it said that if a planet, if the moon, if a well-placed moon were sextiling or trining the planet, that actually fortifies it. Then the other thing it said was if there's a sextile or trine from the sun, which we have here. So once again, this Saturn is getting all of the good attention, is getting all of the good juice for the most part in this chart. And so Saturn rules what? The third, the fourth, or I mean, or I guess in this chart, it's the second and the third. But naturally, as far as the whole sign chart, it would be the third and fourth. So once again, it looks like the Saturn, even though it's peregrine, it's well placed by its position. So fourth house means angular, and then it's getting power pushed onto it by the moon, and it's getting virtue pushed onto it by sun. And as the list says, fortune, yeah, aspected by a fortunate moon, sextile or trine the sun, right? So we've got that. Oh, and then we have the other one was if it were going forward, if it were, what is it, advancing, if it's advancing. Oh, last thing I want to talk about, angular succeeding, that's one of the things to talk about. Last thing I want to talk about is Hayz, H-A-Y-Z, Hayz. And it's also known as domain. And we talked about this way early in the session, but this is another way in which a planet can be strong. And that's when daytime planets are above the horizon and nighttime planets are below the horizon, or vice versa. So this is a nighttime chart. So we would want to see the moon and Mars and Venus above the horizon, away from the sun. Those are the nighttime planets. The daytime planets are the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. So for a planet to be in Hayz or in domain, it needs to be in the right hemisphere, right? So that means the moon would need to be in the upper hemisphere at night, because the sun is in the lower one. So the moon would need to be in the upper hemisphere at night in a feminine sign. This moon is in Hayz. And then as far as the daytime planets, they would all need to be in masculine signs. None of them are. Jupiter is in a feminine sign, Sun, Saturn, all of them are in feminine signs. And then Venus and Mars are down here with the sun. So they're not where they should be. They should be up here. So the only planet in Hayz is the moon. And so that's kind of interesting and important. Let's look at one other chart as far as domain. Damn it. Okay, RLW 1900. This will be the last one we'll look at, and then we'll go. Okay, so it's nighttime, which means that the moon and Mars and Venus should be up here. They are not. And Sun and Jupiter and Saturn should be down here. Saturn's up there, Jupiter's down here. So the sun is in Hayz. Sun is in his own sign. I mean, Sun is in his own sign, but he's also in a masculine sign, which is his own sign. Sun is in a masculine sign in the opposite, in his main damn it. Really, what should probably be happening? No, he's okay. Sun is in Hayz because it's the moon who should be up there. The sun is fine where he is. Jupiter, if he were in a masculine sign, would also be in Hayz or domain. Okay, so that's another way in which a planet can be fortified. And in this particular chart, what did we? Oh, we decided that the sun was one of the most fortified of the planets here. Okay, if you've got a question, go ahead and write it into the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and just stop the recording anyway.